The grand chamber of the Cathar Concordance was a testament to a union forged in cosmic dust and stellar fire, a place of immense gravity, both literal and political. Its walls, carved from the heart of a neutron star remnant, absorbed all light and sound, creating a silence that was not empty, but heavy with the weight of unspoken histories and unspeakable futures. At its center, a swirling vortex of stabilized spacetime shimmered, the conduit through which the delegates of 1,000 worlds communed, their forms holographic yet their presence as real as the crushing pressure of the chamber itself. Today, that pressure was suffocating. The air, a meticulously calibrated mix of inert gases and psychic resonance dampeners, felt thin and charged, humming with a collective dread that transcended species and biology. The luminary, a being of pure energy whose form pulsed in gentle, sorrowful waves of violet light, presided from the highest dais, its usual calm effulgence flickering with an uncharacteristic agitation. Below, the delegates murmured, their voices a cacophony of clicks, chimes, sonorous hums, and thoughts projected directly into the psychic ether. They spoke of one thing, one species, one act of such profound, unpardonable madness that it threatened to shatter the delicate peace the Concordance had maintained for millennia. They spoke of the humans. An act of cosmic vandalism, rasped High Arbiter Vorlag of the Vex, his multifaceted eyes blinking in rapid, asynchronous succession. His chitinous exoskeleton, usually a gleaming obsidian, seemed dull, absorbing the chamber's dim light without reflection. They drove a vessel, a massive stellar-class hauler at faster-than-light velocities directly into the Kylosian Veil, not near it, not adjacent to it, into it. The sheer arrogance, the sheer nihilism of the act is incomprehensible. The Kylosian Veil was not empty space. It was a carefully balanced nexus of interstellar pathways, a celestial tapestry woven from gravitational constants and temporal streams, maintained by the Concordance for safe, efficient travel across the spiral arm. To ram it with a ship moving beyond the universal speed limit was akin to throwing a mountain into a perfectly still lake, not just disturbing the surface but shattering the very bedrock beneath. The repercussions were still echoing through the sector: destabilized jump points, gravitational shearing, temporal distortions that aged some systems by centuries while regressing others. A low, mournful tone reverberated from the alcove of the Cygnian delegation, amorphous beings who communicated through controlled sonic frequencies. The veil was more than a convenience, High Arbiter. It was a work of art, a testament to the harmony we strive for. Its resonance patterns were beautiful. Now they scream. They are a chorus of discord. The Cygnians, whose entire culture was based on the pursuit of cosmic harmony, felt the destruction as a physical pain, a deep, spiritual wound that left them shuddering in their containment fields. Beauty and harmony are luxuries we can no longer afford to contemplate, interjected a new voice, sharp and precise. It came from the delegate of the Sill, a silicon-based lifeform whose crystalline body refracted the chamber's light into 1,000 tiny rainbows. Sillic logic was legendarily cold and unyielding. The act was not vandalism. Vandalism implies a lack of purpose. This was a statement, a declaration of instability. The humans are a chaotic variable this Concordance has tolerated for far too long. They operate on principles that are antithetical to ordered existence. Their emotional cores are unshielded, their decision-making processes are polluted by primitive biological imperatives. We have classified them as a Level 7 emergent species, a designation that affords them protections and considerations. I now posit that this classification is catastrophically flawed. They are not emerging, they are infectious. The chamber fell into a deeper silence, the Sillic delegate's words hanging in the air like suspended shards of glass. The accusation was grave, carrying with it the implicit suggestion of containment, of sanction, perhaps even of excision. To reclassify a species was to rewrite their future, to declare them a galactic threat. The luminary pulsed a wave of calming, golden light, a silent plea for restraint. The Sillic perspective is noted, its voice echoed, not through sound but as a universal concept of authority translated into the mind of every delegate. Yet, we have not received any communication from the humans. No claim of responsibility, no explanation, no demands. There is only silence, a silence that is, perhaps, more unnerving than the act itself. This was the crux of their fear. The collision had occurred without warning. A human vessel, the Wanderer's Hope, a ship registered for deep space colonization and transport, had veered from its designated flight path. It had accelerated to impossible speeds, not through a standard jump drive which bent space, but through a brute force propulsion system that seemed to simply break it. It had torn a wound in reality, aimed itself at the heart of the veil, and vanished in a flash of incandescent energy that had blinded sensors across a dozen star systems. In its wake, chaos, and from Earth, from their colonial outposts, from their fleets patrolling their self-proclaimed territories, nothing, not a word. This lack of communication was what truly terrified the Concordance. A conqueror would issue demands. A terrorist would make a statement. A madman would rant. The humans did none of these things. They had committed an act of unimaginable destruction and then had fallen utterly, unnervingly silent, leaving the rest of the galaxy to stare into the abyss of their motives. High Arbiter Vorlag shifted his weight, the scraping of his claws on the obsidian floor a grating sound in the stillness. Their silence is the act itself, luminary. It is a psychological weapon. They force us to imagine the worst. They want us to tear ourselves apart with speculation and fear. Do we prepare for war? Do we extend the hand of diplomacy to a species that just used one of its own ships as a battering ram against the laws of physics? They are infants playing with stellar fire, and they have just set the nursery ablaze. Or they are something far older and more cunning than we have ever dared to imagine, countered the Silic delegate. Their history is a tapestry of self-inflicted violence and miraculous recovery. They have purged their own planet with fire and radiation, only to rise from the ashes more resilient. Their technological leaps are erratic, unpredictable. They stagnated for millennia, bound to their world, and then in a handful of centuries they reached for the stars. They do not follow the natural, measured path of civilizational development. They are a storm, a hurricane of progress and destruction, and they are now blowing through our house of carefully constructed order. The luminary pulsed again, a slow, rhythmic thrum of deep indigo. We have dispatched a diplomatic fleet to their primary star system, Saul, a fleet of inquiry, not of war. It is commanded by Executor Tyrell of the Praxian fleet. He is methodical, patient. He will not be provoked. He will seek to understand before he seeks to act. A wave of dissent rippled through the chamber. The Praxians were known for their rigid adherence to protocol, their almost religious devotion to the Concordance's charter. To many, they were the perfect choice. To others, they were lambs being led to a slaughter they could not even comprehend. Executor Tyrell thinks in straight lines and logical progressions, Vorlag argued, his voice dripping with skepticism. How can he possibly comprehend a species that thinks in spirals, in chaotic, emotional bursts? He will hail them on diplomatic channels while they are preparing to turn their own sun into a weapon. We are sending a scholar to negotiate with a volcano. The debate raged on, a microcosm of the galactic turmoil. Species whose ancestors had warred for eons found common ground in their shared fear of humanity. The elegant, telepathic Lorians, who saw thought as a sacred art, recoiled from the psychic noise of the human collective. A chaotic storm of ambition, love, hatred, and trivial anxieties, all broadcast with an unthinking, unfiltered intensity. The Genarl, hulking beings of stone and mineral who valued permanence and stability above all else, could not fathom a species that so readily discarded its own creations, its own worlds, in the pursuit of something new. They saw the FTL collision not just as an attack on infrastructure, but as an attack on the very concept of a stable, predictable universe. To them, the humans were agents of entropy, a force of nature given sentient form. Deep in his meditative trance, the Cygnian delegate felt the echoes of the Veil's destruction. He remembered the first contact with the humans, a century ago. A small probe, broadcasting a simple, elegant mathematical language followed by images of their world, their art, their faces. There was a vulnerability to them then, a sense of hopeful, naive curiosity. They had seemed so small, a fledgling species reaching out from their single, fragile world. The Concordance had welcomed them with caution, offering guidance, access to limited technologies, a place at the periphery of the galactic community. They had observed as the humans expanded, their progress explosive. They built colonies with a speed that defied logistical models. They developed technologies that seemed to bypass entire stages of scientific evolution. There was always a restlessness to them, a relentless, insatiable drive to push boundaries, to go further, faster, deeper. And now this act of profound, terrifying violence. The Cygnian delegate replayed the sensor readings the event, the raw data that had been sanitized for the Council. The human ship hadn't just collided with the Veil. The energy signature was wrong. It wasn't an explosion in the conventional sense. It was more like a cancellation, a nullification. Two impossibly powerful forces meeting and annihilating each other in a burst of pure, sterile energy. The ship, the Wanderer's hope, had ceased to exist, but so had something else. Something that had been moving within the veil, something that had been cloaked from concordance sensors, a shadow moving between the streams of spacetime. The humans hadn't just rammed a celestial structure. They had rammed something specific. But what? And why had they not spoken of it? Why this terrifying, absolute silence? The fear in the chamber was not just of what the humans had done, but of the possibility that they had done it for a reason so far beyond the concordance's understanding that it rendered all their political posturing, all their threats and their diplomacy, utterly meaningless. They were debating the motives of a tidal wave, blind to the moon that pulled it. The silence from Earth was not an act of arrogance. It was the calm before a storm far greater than any of them had ever imagined. And deep down, in the core of their ancient, collective consciousness, they were beginning to understand that the war had already begun, not with a declaration or a battle, but with a single, insane act of sacrifice in the empty orbits of their understanding. Executor Tyrell stood on the bridge of the Vigilance, a Praxian vessel whose every line and curve spoke of unwavering purpose. The viewscreen before him was dominated by the third planet of the Sol system, Earth. It was a jewel of impossible blues and swirling whites, a vibrant cradle of life that seemed from this distance an oasis of tranquility. Yet the tranquility was a lie. Tyrell's sensory input, a direct feed of data from the ship's external arrays, painted a very different picture. The space around the planet, and indeed throughout the entire system, was a maelstrom of activity. Not the chaotic, disorganized scramble of a species preparing for war, but something else entirely. Something coordinated, methodical. The ship traffic, from lumbering orbital factories to nimble defense platforms, moved with a fluid, interlocking precision that reminded Tyrell of the crystalline gears of a Silic chronometer. There was no panic. No sign of alarm at the arrival of a concordance fleet. There was only focus. His subcommander, a younger Praxian named Kalen, approached, his footsteps silent on the sound-dampening deck. "Executor," he began, his voice a model of Praxian composure, "we have been in orbit for 3 standard rotations. We have broadcast the standard concordance hails on all frequencies, as instructed. We have identified ourselves as a diplomatic envoy. We have received no response." Tyrell did not turn. His gaze remained fixed on the blue world below. "Their orbital defense grid is active but not targeting us. Their energy signatures are high but stable. It is not the posture of a species expecting an attack." "With respect, Executor," Kalen pressed, "it is the posture of a species that does not care that we are here. A species that is entirely consumed by its own affairs. The arrogance is—" "It is not arrogance," Tyrell interrupted, his tone soft but firm, carrying the weight of his long command. "Arrogance is loud, it preens, it boasts. This is something else. This is concentration, the kind one sees in a predator stalking unseen prey or a weaver finishing a complex tapestry. Every ship, every station, every comms relay is part of a single, system-wide machine, and it is working towards a purpose we cannot yet see." He finally turned to face his subcommander. "Send the message again, but this time add a single human phrase to the data stream, one of the first they ever broadcast. We come in peace for all mankind." Kalen's mandibles clicked in a gesture of Praxian confusion, a subtle but clear sign of his doubt. "Executor, that is an archaic, species-specific phrase. It is sentimental. The concordance protocols call for precise, unambiguous language." "The concordance protocols were written for species who think like us," Tyrell replied. "The humans do not. Their history shows that they respond to symbolism, to gestures of emotional resonance. A cold, logical hail from a fleet of warships might be interpreted as a prelude to an ultimatum. An echo of their own past, a gesture of peace, might just be strange enough to pique their curiosity." The order was given. The message was sent, a tiny packet of data and sentiment cast into the bustling silence of the Sol system. For a time, there was nothing. The ships continued their silent, purposeful ballet. The orbital factories continued to vent plumes of vapor into the void. The planet below continued its slow, graceful turn. Kalen was about to voice his skepticism when a new icon bloomed on the primary display. It was a communication channel opening. Not a broad, system-wide broadcast, but a tight beam, directed exclusively at the Vigilance. It was clean, unencrypted, and carried a single, simple message in perfect concordance standard. "Welcome to Sol, Executor Tyrell. We apologize for the delay. We have been busy. Please transmit your vessel's schematics for docking clearance. Ambassador Sarah Reed will meet you aboard Orbital Station Epsilon." The bridge crew of the Vigilance exchanged uneasy glances. The ease of it was disquieting. The directness. They had expected threats or demands or at the very least, a tense negotiation over communication protocols. Instead, they had received a polite, almost casual invitation. Kalen reviewed the transmission data. Executor, the message originates from the planet's surface, a location they call Geneva. But the signal is being routed through their entire orbital network, relayed from station to station in a cascading sequence. It's inefficient, unnecessary. No, Tyrell murmured, a dawning understanding in his multifaceted eyes. It's not inefficient, it's a demonstration. They are showing us their command and control network. They are showing us that every single component in this system is linked, a single thinking entity. And they did it in response to a symbolic gesture. Send them our schematics and prepare a shuttle. I will meet this Ambassador Reed. Orbital Station Epsilon was not a weapon. It was not a fortress. To Tyrell's surprise, it appeared to be a university, a research facility, and a residential habitat all woven into one. Its corridors were not cold, metallic passages, but wide, open spaces filled with green, growing things, illuminated by light that mimicked the warmth of a G-type star. The air, filtered and recycled, carried the scent of soil and chlorophyll. Beings of dozens of non-human species, refugees, scholars, merchants who had chosen to live within human space, walked the corridors alongside the humans, their interactions relaxed, unforced. There was no sign of the frantic, militaristic preparation Tyrell had expected. The atmosphere was one of profound, unshakable calm. He was met not by a phalanx of guards, but by a single human female. She was tall for her species, her hair the color of spun moonlight, her eyes a shade of gray that seemed to hold the wisdom of an ancient sea. She wore simple, functional clothing, and her face held a look of weary, patient intelligence. She offered a slight inclination of her head, a gesture Tyrell's cultural database identified as a sign of respectful greeting. "Executor Tyrell," she said, her voice even and clear, resonating with a quiet authority that needed no amplification. "I am Ambassador Sarah Reed. Thank you for coming. I imagine the Concordance has many questions." Tyrell performed the Praxian gesture of formal address, a slow, deliberate extension of his primary manipulator clause. "Ambassador, many questions is a significant understatement. Your species has committed an act that has destabilized an entire sector of the galaxy. You have shattered the Kylosian Veil, a structure of profound importance to interstellar travel and commerce. You have violated a dozen concordance treaties, and you have offered no explanation. The High Council is displeased. Some factions are calling for your immediate censure, others for far worse." Sarah Reed listened patiently, her expression unchanging. When he had finished, she gestured down the corridor. "Walk with me, Executor. There is something you need to see. Answering your questions will be easier once you have the proper context." She led him not to a briefing room or a command center, but to a vast observatory dome. The starfield outside was breathtaking, a river of diamonds spilled across black velvet. But Tyrell's attention was drawn to the center of the dome. A holographic display, immense and intricate, dominated the space. It was a map, but not of stars or planets. It was a map of the Kylosian Veil, or rather what the Veil had been. And moving within its shimmering, ghostly pathways were other things, intrusions. "Anomalies. For generations," Sarah began, her voice low, "the Concordance has viewed the Veil as a natural phenomenon, a network of stable gravitational currents that you learned to navigate. You saw it as a river and you built your boats to sail upon it. We saw it differently. Our probes, our deep-range sensors, they showed us that the currents weren't entirely natural. They were too stable, too perfect. We began to suspect the Veil wasn't a river, it was a highway, and it had been built." Tyrell stared at the map. He saw the Concordance trade routes marked in placid blue. But now, overlaid in a stark, angry red, he saw other pathways, routes that his own people's far more advanced sensors had never detected. They moved through the Veil like parasites, hidden within subspac. Folds shielded from conventional detection, and along these red pathways, things were moving. "What are they?" Tyrell asked, his voice a dry rasp. "We don't know," Sarah admitted, her gaze fixed on the display. "Not for certain. We have no clear images, no biological data, no direct communication. We only have their wake, the energy they leave behind. We call them the shadows. They move through the hidden layers of the Veil, and where they pass, things go missing. A research outpost on a gas giant's moon, a colony on a world thought to be uninhabited, a fleet of G-Gnarl freighters that vanished without a distress call. The Concordance archives are full of these unexplained phenomena. Ships that disappear, colonies that go silent. You classify them as pirate attacks or stellar anomalies or equipment failure. You have done so for centuries. but the pattern is there if you know how to look for it. She manipulated a control panel, and the display zoomed in on a specific point in the now-destroyed veil. A red line, representing the path of a shadow vessel, was shown moving directly towards a densely populated concordance system. And on an intercept course was another icon, representing the human ship, the Wanderer's Hope. The shadows were accelerating, Sarah said, her voice heavy with the weight of her words. For centuries, they were cautious, taking small targets on the galactic fringe, but recently their activity has escalated. They were becoming bolder. This one, she pointed to the red icon, was the largest we had ever detected. Its energy signature was immense, and it was no longer hiding. It was moving towards the Kelthran system, a world with a population of billions, a concordance member world. Tyrell felt a cold dread creep through his exoskeleton, a feeling alien to his disciplined Praxian mind. You are saying this shadow was an invader. It was a predator, Sarah corrected him gently. And the veil was its hunting ground. We tried to warn you. We sent data packets to the Concordant Science Council highlighting the energy anomalies. We pointed out the statistical improbability of so many unexplained disappearances along specific, recurring vectors. Our findings were dismissed, labeled as human paranoia, flawed data analysis, an attempt by a junior species to gain political leverage. Your council refused to see the monster living in your own closet. The pieces began to click into place in Tyrell's mind, forming a picture of horrifying clarity. The silence, the focus, the system-wide coordination. It wasn't preparation for a war with the Concordance. It was a war that had been raging in the shadows for years, a war the Concordance hadn't even known it was fighting. The Wanderer's Hope, Tyrell said, the name of the ship now tasting like ash. It was not an act of random destruction. No, Sarah replied, her gray eyes meeting his. It was an act of calculated sacrifice. The shadow vessel was shielded not just from sensors but from conventional weaponry. It existed in a state of partial phase, allowing it to move through the veil's currents. Our weapons would have passed right through it. We couldn't shoot it, so we had to hit it. We needed something with enough mass, moving at a velocity that would create a reality shear. Something that would tear a hole in spacetime big enough to force the shadow vessel back into our dimension, even for a nanosecond. A faster-than-light collision, Tyrell breathed, the sheer, insane physics of it staggering him. The temporal distortions, the gravitational backlash, were catastrophic, Sarah finished for him. And we knew they would be. We chose a section of the veil that was relatively remote, but the destruction was still immense. It was a terrible price to pay. But the alternative was allowing that thing to reach Kelthran. We chose the destruction of a highway over the annihilation of a world. The crew of the Wanderers hoped they were volunteers. They knew what they were doing. They knew their sacrifice would be misunderstood, that the galaxy would see them as monsters. They did it anyway. Tyrell was speechless. The Vex called them vandals. The Sill called them chaotic. The Signians called them a source of discord. But they were guardians. They had been fighting a secret, lonely war on behalf of a galaxy that was too arrogant and too blind to see the threat. The single, insane act of FTL collision was not an act of war against the Concordance. It was the single, desperate, and ultimately successful culmination of a war that had just been won. For now. Why, Tyrell finally asked, the question a whisper. Why the silence? If you had told the council what you were doing, explain the threat. Sarah gave him a sad, tired smile. Executor, think of the species on your council, the Vex who see strength in aggression, the Sill who see danger in anything they cannot quantify. How many of them would have panicked? How many? Why would have demanded proof we could not provide without revealing our full sensor capabilities? How many would have accused us of fabricating a threat to justify our own military expansion? The Concordance would have debated. They would have formed committees. They would have sent probes. And while they debated, Kelthran would have burned. No, Executor, we did what we had to do. We took the galaxy's condemnation to save one of its worlds, and we remained silent because we were busy. The collision didn't just destroy the shadow vessel. It revealed them. For a few brief moments, the energy flare from the collision illuminated the other shadows hiding in the veil, like lightning flashing in a dark forest. We got a full count. We learned their dispositions, their numbers. We learned the scale of the threat. She turned back to the star map. The destruction of the veil was tragic, Executor, but it was also necessary. We had to tear down the hunting ground. And now, her voice dropped, losing its weariness and taking on a steely edge of resolve. We are hunting the hunters. Tyrell looked from the calm, determined face of the human ambassador to the holographic display, where dozens of new icons were now appearing. Human fleets, moving with that same quiet, methodical purpose he had observed from orbit. They weren't scrambling or panicking. They were deploying. They were moving to intercept points, setting up blockades, reinforcing systems that lay along the newly revealed shadow pathways. They had been preparing for this moment for years, perhaps decades. Their entire civilization had been quietly, secretly transformed into a weapon, a shield against a nightmare the rest of the galaxy hadn't even known existed. The war wasn't about to begin in their orbits. The next phase of a very old war had just begun, and for the first time, humanity was not fighting it alone. They were simply waiting for the rest of the galaxy to catch up. The journey back to the Concordance fleet felt, to Tyrell, like a passage between realities. He had arrived in the Sol system as an executor of a powerful, unified galactic body, sent to pass judgment on a reckless junior species. He was leaving as a messenger, a harbinger of a truth so vast and so terrifying that he feared the Concordance, in its ancient, rigid pride, might shatter beneath its weight. His shuttle passed through the human orbital network again, but now he saw it not as a display of arrogance, but as a shield, a sleepless watchtower manned by a species that had taken upon itself a burden of terrible, lonely vigilance. He saw the green, living habitats not as a sign of decadent softness, but as a fierce, defiant declaration of what they were fighting for, life, in all its chaotic, fragile beauty. When he reboarded the Vigilance, the bridge was as he had left it, silent, orderly, a perfect reflection of Praxian discipline, but the silence now felt different. It was no longer the calm of superiority, but the quiet of ignorance. Kalen met him, his posture impeccable. "Executor, did the humans offer a defense for their actions?" Tyrell paused, the full weight of his experience settling upon him. "A defense?" he repeated slowly. "No, Sub-Commander, they offered an education." He walked to his command chair, the eyes of the entire bridge crew upon him. The feed from Orbital Station Epsilon, the holographic map of the Veil and the shadows within it, had been transmitted to the Vigilance's core databanks. "Open a secure channel to the Luminary, highest priority. Encrypt it with command-level clearance. What I am about to transmit will change everything." The emergency session of the Cathar Concordance was convened with a speed that bespoke a deep and gnawing panic. Tyrell's initial report, a carefully worded summary of his findings, had landed like an asteroid in the placid waters of galactic politics. Now, his full, unedited recording of the meeting with Ambassador Reed, including the visual data of the shadow threat, was being projected into the center of the Grand Chamber. The swirling vortex of spacetime that served as the conduit was now filled with the images from the Epsilon Observatory, the hidden pathways of the shadows, the cold, analytical icons representing their vessels, the chilling simulation of the Wanderer's Hope's final, sacrificial run. For the first time in centuries, the chamber was utterly silent. There were no murmurs, no clicks, no chimes of dissent. High Arbiter Vorlag's multifaceted eyes were wide, fixed on the holographic display, his usual bluster replaced by a stunned, horrified stillness. The Silic delegate's crystalline form seemed to vibrate with the sheer, overwhelming influx of new, terrifyingly logical data. The mournful tones of the Signians had ceased. They were now projecting a feeling of shared, profound dread, a harmony of fear that united the chamber as no treaty ever had. They had condemned the humans for destroying a beautiful, harmonious structure, only to learn that the harmony was a facade, a beautiful spider's web, and they had all been sleeping flies. When the recording ended, the silence remained, thick and suffocating. It was the luminary who finally broke it, its form a pulsing, somber crimson. "Executor Tyrell has verified the data. Our own deep-range sensor logs, when reanalyzed with the human-provided algorithms, confirm their findings. The anomalies are there. The disappearances, they form a pattern of predation. We have been culled, harvested for centuries, and we called it the cost of living in the cosmos." "They knew," Vorlag rasped, his voice barely a whisper. "The humans knew, and they fought for us, in secret. While we debated their aesthetic deficiencies and their emotional instability, they were bleeding for us in the dark." The shame in his voice was a palpable force, a psychic wave that washed over the assembled delegates. They had been arrogant children, scolding the one adult in the room for breaking a toy, not understanding that he had done it to save them from the monster hiding under the bed. The Silic delegate spoke, its voice stripped of its usual cold certainty, now holding a note of something akin to awe. "The logic is flawless. Faced with a silent, invisible, and overwhelmingly powerful enemy and a Galactic Council too blind to see the threat, they chose the only viable strategic path, a covert war. They sacrificed their own, they accepted our condemnation, they bore the burden of knowledge alone. Their capacity for long-term strategic planning, their willingness to endure misunderstanding for the sake of the greater good. It is a level of ordered thinking we had not believed organic, emotional beings to be capable of. We have miscalculated. We have miscalculated on a civilizational scale. A new transmission came through the conduit. It was not from the human military or their government. It was an open broadcast from Ambassador Sarah Reed, sent from orbital station Epsilon to the entire concordance. Her image appeared, calm and resolute as ever, standing before the same star map Tyrell had seen. "Delegates of the Cathar Concordance," she began, her voice resonating with a quiet strength that filled the chamber. "For more than a century, humanity has been a part of this galactic community, and for more than a century, we have watched you. We have learned from your histories, your philosophies, your art. We saw your desire for harmony, your quest for logic, your deep, abiding love of stability, and we saw your blindness. A blindness born from a peace so old you have forgotten the price at which it was bought. You feared us for our chaotic nature, our history of conflict. But it is that very history that has taught us the one lesson you have had the luxury to forget, that there are things in the universe that do not negotiate, that do not respond to reason, that see harmony and logic and stability not as virtues, but as vulnerabilities, as a well-stocked pantry." She gestured to the map behind her. "The war against the shadows is not new, it is ancient. We have merely been the first to recognize it in this cycle. Now that recognition is shared. The Cathar Concordance now stands at a crossroads. You can continue to debate, to form committees, to fear the unknown, or you can stand with us, not behind us, not in front of us, but beside us. Humanity does not seek to lead this war. We seek partners. We have the knowledge of the enemy, the strategies to fight them. You have the resources, the industrial might of 1,000 worlds, the ancient wisdom of your collective species. Together, we can forge a shield that will protect this galaxy for eons to come. Alone, we will all be consumed by the darkness you refuse to see." Her speech was not a plea. It was not a demand. It was a simple statement of fact, a presentation of a choice, as clear and as cold as the void between stars. And in that moment, the concordance was transformed. The old rivalries, the petty squabbles, the centuries of diplomatic maneuvering, all of it seemed to melt away in the face of this new, existential truth. The fear of humanity was replaced by a far greater fear, and a profound, humbling respect for the species that had faced it alone. The luminary pulsed with a brilliant, unwavering white light. "Ambassador Reed," it projected, its voice ringing with a newfound conviction. "The Cathar Concordance accepts. We will stand with you. We will fight. What is your first request?" The alliance was forged. Fleets that had once been poised to blockade human space were now being rerouted, their mission changing from containment to cooperation. Silic logicians began working alongside human strategists, their cold calculus combining with human intuition to create battle plans of terrifying efficiency. Praxian shipyards, which had built vessels for diplomacy and patrol, began retrofitting them for a war they were only now beginning to understand. The Signians composed new harmonies, battle anthems that could strengthen morale and disrupt the low-frequency psychic emanations that seemed to accompany the shadow vessels. A new sense of purpose, of unity forged in the crucible of shared fear, swept through the galaxy. Humanity, the quiet, unpredictable outsider, was now at the heart of the largest military and industrial mobilization in galactic history, and they handled it with a calm, ethical grace that continued to confound their new allies. They shared their sensor technology freely, without demanding concessions. They integrated their command structures with those of the Concordance fleets, accepting alien commanders as their superiors when the strategic situation warranted it. They showed no desire for conquest, no thirst for glory. Their only stated goal was the preservation of life, all life. In the midst of this grand, sweeping change, Executor Tyrell found himself back on orbital station Epsilon, this time as the Concordance's official military liaison. He stood once more with Sarah Reed in the observatory, but the map was different now. It was a shared map, glowing with the icons of a dozen different fleets, all moving in a coordinated dance. The first joint operations had been a success. Several shadow vessels, caught off guard by the new unified galactic response, had been cornered and destroyed. The human-designed, reality-shear torpedoes, weapons born from the same principle as the Wanderer's Hope's final act, proved devastatingly effective. For the first time in centuries, the shadows were being hunted. "It is remarkable," Tyrell said, his voice filled with a genuine wonder that his Praxian discipline could not suppress. "The speed of this transition, the unity. You have changed the course of galactic history in a single cycle." "We didn't change it," Sarah replied, her eyes on the starfield beyond the dome. "We just pointed it in the direction it was always meant to go. Unity isn't a state of being, Executor. It's a response. It's what happens when the children finally realize the house is on fire." There was a comfortable silence between them, the silence of soldiers who have seen the same enemy and have chosen to stand on the same wall. The immediate crisis seemed to be passing. The shadows were a fearsome enemy, but they were a known quantity now. Their tactics were being analyzed, their weaknesses exploited. The war would be long and costly, but for the first time it felt winnable. It was in this moment of shared, quiet optimism that a new alert chimed, a soft, almost hesitant sound. A technician at a nearby console turned, his face pale. "Ambassador, Executor, we're receiving a signal. It's coming from the wreck of the primary shadow vessel, the one the Wanderers hope destroyed." Sarah and Tyrell exchanged a look. "That's impossible," Tyrell said. "There was nothing left of it but radiation and distorted spacetime." "The signal is not a standard transmission," the technician stammered, his fingers flying across his console. "It's not radio, it's not gravitic, it's a quantum entanglement echo. A message imprinted on the very fabric of reality at the moment of its destruction, a dead man's switch. It's taken us this long to even detect it, let alone decode it." "Put it on the main screen," Sarah commanded, her voice steady. The star map vanished, replaced by a storm of static and data fragments. Slowly, agonizingly, the human and Silic translation algorithms began to piece it together. It was not a message of defiance. It was not a threat. It was a distress call, a warning. The language was alien, ancient, but the concepts were terrifyingly universal: fear, desperation, flight. "They were not invaders," Tyrell breathed as the decoded fragments scrolled across the screen. "Fleeing, the silence, it consumes all, sound, light, thought, the great nothing. Behind us, always behind us." Sarah stared at the words, her mind racing past the immediate conflict, past the war with the shadows, to a new, infinitely more horrifying conclusion. "They weren't predators," she whispered, her voice trembling for the first time since Tyrell had met her. "They weren't hunting us." On the screen, a final, chilling sentence coalesced from the chaotic data. A message from a long-dead enemy, a warning to their killers. "We were just running. We were running from the real hunters." The message ended, leaving only the cold, silent starfield in its place. The war they had just united to fight was not the real war. It was just a border skirmish, the desperate flight of one civilization crashing into another. The shadows, the terrifying, dimension-hopping monsters they had finally learned how to fight, were not the ultimate threat. They were refugees. And out there in the vast, silent darkness between galaxies, the thing they were fleeing from was still coming. The sense of victory that had filled the obs. Urvatory evaporated, replaced by a cold, cosmic dread, a silence that was not empty, but filled with the weight of a universe far larger, far older, and far more hungry than any of them had ever dared to imagine. Humanity had brought the galaxy together to face a monster, only to discover it was merely the monster's shadow. The real war was just about to begin.